Welcome to the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, where we have open and honest conversations about co-parenting, separation, divorce, and the hardest question of all, should you stay or should you go? I'm Kate Anthony, your Divorce Survival Guide, and I'm here to help you navigate some of the roughest waters you've ever swum in and answer some of your toughest questions. I've been to hell and back, and now it's my mission in life to help you get to the other side of this process with your sanity and your heart intact. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. I am your host, your Divorce Survival Guide, Kate Anthony. You guys, times are cray. Times be cray. I don't know about you, but I'm really kind of struggling to work, to feel like focused on getting anything done. I'm noticing my focus is really scattered, and I'm not being particularly productive, and I'm just trying to give myself a little bit of a break on that. And I hope that if you are feeling that way too, if you're homeschooling and working from home and panicking about a pandemic, that's a lot right there. I know that I kind of feel like I'm not really doing anything really well. And I'm trying not to beat myself up about it because we're in a fucking pandemic. If you're not going to be doing things well, now's pretty much the time to give yourself a pass. That's what I have to say to you. So today is our last episode in therapy month. Now, that's not to say that we will not have future therapy months down the road, because I'm sure we will. But I am super excited today to bring you my interview with my dear friend, Gwynn Raimondi. Gwynn is a therapist, obviously, because she's rounding out therapy month, and she specializes in complex trauma. She also specializes in grief, embodiment, and how they intersect with trauma. She is systems focused, and she explores how the greater world impacts and influences individuals, how the trauma we have experienced influences our relationships with others, our relationships with ourselves and the world, and how living in our current patriarchal, authoritarian, white supremacist culture exacerbates the lived experience and ancestral trauma that lives within us. So y'all know that's right up my alley, right? Complex trauma is essentially the thing that almost every one of us deals with on some level. I don't know anybody who has not been affected by some form of complex trauma. And, I think we start off this episode really sort of defining what trauma is. And it's really important for you guys to hear this, because it's not what you think. It's just not what you think. We all have it. We all suffer from it, to varying degrees, for sure. But most of us have it, especially those of us who are in relationships that are certainly abusive. There's so much trauma that comes along with that, but also that has led us there, right? It's usually our childhood trauma that leads us to be in relationships like these. And, that trauma can look like neglect. It can look like all sorts of things. So, I could talk about it, or I could just shut up and give you my interview. I'm going to play my interview with the expert on trauma. But before I do, I just want to say that Gwynn has an amazing Instagram account. She also has a Facebook group. She also posts everything on her Facebook page. And I highly recommend everyone following her somewhere, because the way that she talks about trauma, she also gives such insight in how to regulate your central nervous system, which is the thing that gets activated in trauma. And so seriously, find her on all the platforms. Give her a follow. She also has a deck of cards, which I think is super, super cool. That you can just pull a card and like regulate your nervous system with very simple exercises. So she is my go-to person on all things complex trauma, and I think she should be yours as well. So here we are. Give a listen to my interview with Gwynn Raimondi. Gwynn, thank you so much for being here to talk about trauma.
Yay! Yay! So excited. I am actually, but
no, I am too, actually. It's hard. I'm feeling it right now, actually. I got to tell you, like, I think I told you before we started recording, I'm feeling it a little bit today.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about,
Yeah.
So let's start from the beginning.
Okay.
Because so many people, and myself included, for many years, think that trauma is like you were raped, you were like sudden trauma, right? You were hit by a car, your grandfather, your father died in front of you, right? Like really serious, like sudden trauma. And that's the only kind of trauma that we sort of seem to think of. I think that culturally we're shifting a little bit, but
yeah.
So can you what is trauma?
So trauma, I think it's Levine's definition of trauma that I think that he is the one who said this. And that trauma is any event that we don't bounce back from. We can't just immediately, like our resilience doesn't just kick in and we're like, even if we're feeling sad, even if we're mad, even if we feel the things, right, we still are bouncing back, right? And so any event that impacts us in a way that just gets us stuck is considered traumatic. So it can be the big things like rape, car accidents, your house burns down, like all of those things. It can be the big things we think about in childhood, like being physically abused or sexually abused as a kid. And it's also all those little insidious things, right? So when we think about childhood trauma, people generally just think about abuse. And it's greater than that, right? Because even if your parent or caregiver never once hit you or never once, was inappropriate with you physically in any way, if they yelled a lot, that can be traumatic.
Yeah.
Because it puts our system in a fight-flight mode. It increases our cortisol, our adrenaline goes. And if that's happening a lot and we aren't getting enough recovery time when we're little, to in between the yelling bouts, having a parent that yelled a lot is traumatic, even if they aren't yelling at us. Like even if it's like they stub their toe on the wall and they scream at the wall, like those kinds of things, if they're happening over and over and over again and making our system get impacted over and over and over again, that produces a trauma response.
And what about like less overt, right, kinds of things like criticism or right, like just like things that are sort of again, like less.
Neglect is a big thing, right? People think that neglect is not as bad, all the air quotes, right, as being physically abused, but that's not true because the whole, what we're talking about has been now called complex trauma is what we're talking about. Childhood, anything that happens when we're young, when our brains are developing, and all of these events impact the way our brains then are wired, right? I mean,
like, is there anyone on earth who doesn't have complex trauma?
My argument would be no, there's not.
But I literally can't think of I'm like, who exists like that?
Right. Yes, right? Being criticized and neglect. And because all of this is about when we're kids, we rely on our caretakers to keep us alive. So if there is anything that threatens or we perceive to threaten our caretaker giving us food, shelter, protection, then that that puts us into a fight flight response. That puts us into that survival response. And that constant being put in that survival response is the trauma. That is where the trauma comes from.
So can you define that, the fight, flight, or freeze, the trauma response? Like what can you talk about what's actually happening in our bodies and in our brains?
Yeah. So what's happening is that so the brain can be split up into many different sections, right? But when we talk about trauma, we talk about three sections. We talk about front brain, which is prefrontal cortex, where all of our logic and reasoning and problem solving and creativity and all of our evolvedness lives. And then there's midbrain, which is a translator. And then we have back brain, and back brain is all about survival. Sometimes back brain's called our reptilian brain.
Or that's the lizard brain, right?
That's our lizard brain, right? That's all about, I just have to keep breathing so that I can reproduce. I mean, that is literally what this survival response is about. Mm-hmm. Midbrain is supposed to be the translator between front and back, because they can't talk to each other directly. We can't, for whatever reasons, our brains weren't made that way. So
well, I think for good reason, right? Like because when the back brain, this is the amygdala, right? When that takes over, it is about survival, and we can't fucking think about it.
Right.
To analyze.
If we are actually in a survival situation, right? That's where it gets fucked up, is because, and why we need midbrain to be doing that translating, because we can be in a situation where we're having a political debate, right? And there's no physical threat to us whatsoever. Like, we are perfectly physically safe, and yet we are totally activated. Our system is in survival mode. We're freaking the fuck out. And all we're doing is talking about...
All we're doing is talking on the internet.
All we're doing is talking on the internet. That's all we're doing, right? But, right? And so we need this midbrain to be active so that we can have that conversation between our front and back, so that we can, one thing that so many of my clients experience is like panic or anxiety attacks, and they come out of nowhere, right? And and this has happened to me. I couldn't even tell you how many times, right? Where we're in a perfectly safe space. There's no actual threat happening. We're not even arguing with someone. Like, there's no threat to us whatsoever. And we go into panic mode for whatever reasons, right? And so what we want to be able to do is talk ourselves down out of that tree, right? We want to be able to then regulate our system. We want to be able to calm ourselves down. We want to remind ourselves, no, I'm actually in a physically safe space. I'm not in harm's way, blah, 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 blah. And we have to have midbrain working to be able to get front brain to talk to back brain. Because what's happened to me and so many people I know, is that we go into panic and we're sitting there and we're having that conversation in front brain, like, what the fuck is wrong? I'm totally fine. There's no reason for me to be freaking out right now. Why am I freaking out? This is stupid that I'm freaking out, blah, 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 blah. While our body continues to
pump the cortisol,
and the adrenaline, and our breathing gets shallower and shallower, and our heartbeat gets faster and faster, right? Even though in logic brain we're like, but we're fine. Happening here, right? Mm-hmm. So we want to be able to have this conversation between front and back brain, because when we are in situations where we are physically safe, we need to be able to do that.
Yes.
Right.
And so this is really interesting, obviously, because I think it takes something. I think that, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it takes a level of, I don't know what it is, development of the front brain, mm-hmm. to be able to recognize that actually there is no threat, right? So when we get triggered, when let's say there is a threat, a perceived threat, right? In a relation, right? And this is, we're going to get to this, I guess, in a minute, right? Yeah. How it manifests in our relationships, where somebody says something, we get triggered, And if we don't have that front part of our brain developed and this is, I think, part of what emotional intelligence does and gives us, right? We're just simply acting from that back brain.
Yeah.
Right. And it takes something, and it takes work, I think, right? Would be to build those neural pathways.
Yes.
To actually connect the two.
Yeah.
Through the middle brain.
Yeah. It does take work, and it takes somatic work. So any sort of body-centered mindfulness type of work that encourages you to be present within your body, to like come back in, to be embodied, to be here, to be now, right? Versus how many of us live out here. Nobody can see what I'm doing, but out here in the, out above and beyond ourselves, right? We aren't present. We're in the past, we're in the future, we're floating out in space, we're like wherever the fuck we aren't here. And so in order to so it's kind of chicken and egg, right? Because we got to get here and we got to build the new neural paths, and we need the new neural paths to be able to be more present. And the more present we are, the more neural paths we grow, right? And on and on and on.
So there's something to be said, obviously, I think, right, for building those neural paths between, right, when you're not in crisis.
Right. I mean, that's the only time you can.
Right.
That's the only time you can.
So that when you're in crisis, you can call upon that muscle that you've already built.
Yeah, exactly.
So it sounds to me like we're talking about mindfulness.
Yeah, sure. I hate the word, but yes.
What? You don't like that word?
I kind of shy away from mindfulness. But
no, great. No, that's why I'm asking.
Not because I think that it got really bastardized when it became popular here in the state, right? Sure. I really do. I think that it did. But it is mindfulness. It is being present, right? But it's more than just being mindful, because being mindful is being in your head. It's having a body-centered mindfulness of being present in your body. So not only can I think all the great thoughts that I think, I can feel all these amazing sensations, and I'm using some sarcasm there, that are coursing through my body, right? And I've written and talked about before how, this is both about pleasure and uncomfort and discomfort, right? That we can't really feel one without the other. Right. And that even when we begin the embodiment work and really start coming in to ourselves and being present, even pleasure can feel uncomfortable, because it's a feeling. We're feeling something, and that's not comfortable, right? So it doesn't matter if it's a, quote, good feeling, or if it's a, quote, bad feeling. I don't think there's good and bad feelings, but there's comfortable and uncomfortable, right?
Right.
It all feels uncomfortable at first because it's new and it's different.
Especially when you are completely disembodied.
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
And I say that from a lot of experience, to have been in a position for so much of I used to say that I felt like I was a head on legs.
Yeah.
Because I felt so disconnected from anything that was really the core of me.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And so, okay, so how do you do that, right? Because I know that you have, embodied trauma. This is your thing. This is your realm.
Right.
So what does that look like?
So, well, there's many different approaches. There's many different body-centered mindfulness approaches. There's, the popular ones that most people know about are somatic experiencing. Some people know about sensory motor approach. Who's the other? EMDR, the eye movement one. Any of those, and then I could list for hours, like, all of the different approaches, which essentially comes down to learning how to sit or stand or whatever, lie, and be still and feel our emotions and all the physical sensations that come with them. right?
That sounds
It's,
so awful.
it is. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I tell people all the time, yeah, this sucks. It sucks.
Totally.
Like, I mean, I've been going through this whole grief thing because it's my life, because life has grief. And like, I'm like, this is bullshit. Whose fucking idea was it for me to feel my feelings? Like, who came up with this? Because this is crap.
Isn't it the worst? I mean, you and I are in, because we're in similar fields, right? That we have to feel all this shit. And every once in a while, we have to deal with it. Like when something else crops itself up and you're like, oh, look, there's another thing I have to deal with. The number of times I've said to myself, like, oh my God, why can't I just go back to being completely ignorant? And like, opened this Pandora's box 20 some odd years ago, and I just want to fucking close it and put it away. I'm so done.
So over it. Yeah, I get it. I get it.
Head on legs thing, it was kind of fine.
Yeah, it was easy. It was so easy. But I mean,
and yet it wasn't. And it wasn't.
And it wasn't, right? Because it totally impacts then the way that we're able to relate with ourselves, the way we're able to relate with our world, the way we're able to relate with other humans, right? And so, so it's that like,
because we're then reactionary, right?
Right.
At this point in our lives, you and I get to go, oh shit, there's that thing. And now I have to deal with it. I have to go back to therapy. I have to do this work. I have to do this. We know what to do. And we're like, but then we go do it. Right.
Right.
But and then we get to sort of be at choice and in some, quote, control. And again, big air quotes over control. But otherwise, it is completely controlling us.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Right.
It's running us. It's running our lives, and it's running our relationships. It's running what careers we choose. It's like,
illnesses we get, right?
The illnesses we get. Yeah. All of it. Like, and so, like I half-heartedly joke, God, I wish I could be 20 and losing my shit again at any singular person who like happened to piss me off that day. And everybody would be like, oh yeah, that's Gwen, right? She loses her shit. Like, right. But and also like, that's not how I want to be in relationship in my 40s, really close to 50s. Like, that's not
you're right. It's not who, no, it's not. And it's not who we're committed to being. I mean, obviously, because we're in this field.
Right. Exactly.
But so let's talk about that. Let's talk about how it actually impacts your relationships, how trauma. So, I mean, essentially, like something happens or things continue to happen, right? And they create this sort of broken part, like something is not... So it creates something in us called trauma. This thing called trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
What were you going to say? You were going to identify it better.
I was going to say that it creates attachment issues. So, as in actual attachment theory, not in the mindful Zen non-attachment bullshit thing, which I have issues with too. But
I'm like completely unattached to how this.
Yeah. What the fuck ever. Anyways, but an attachment, the attachment I'm talking about is how we relate to people and how we're able to connect with people and how we're able to be in meaningful and vulnerable and open, relationship with others, whether that be sexually intimate partners or friends or family, it doesn't matter, right? And we all have these attachment wounds or attachment trauma, which all it's all part of this complex childhood stuff, right? And attachment is specifically how we relate to other people.
Right.
So so in adults, they have named 4 different attachment styles. So there's securely attached people who are these, magical unicorns who don't exist, right?
Who are they?
Whatever.
I know one. I think I know one. I think I know one.
I mean, and I'm getting there, right? You can become more and more securely attached, right?
Yes, me too. Exactly.
Right?
And I think you and I are like proof that like, oh, look, you can actually change from like crazy fucking.
Yeah. For real. Like, you know, borderline psychotic sometimes.
Borderline psychotic.
On my past. Like,
mine too. Oh, mine too.
You know, and, you know, part of that is developmental. Part of that is, going into a lot of fucking therapy and doing the work, right? You know, like, I mean,
100%.
You know, there's different aspects, right?
Yes. Okay, so there's securely attached.
So there's securely attached unicorns, and then there's the 3 insecure attachment styles. One is anxious, and anxious attachment style ultimately looks like what we call clingy. Right?
Yep.
So like the whole like, you didn't call me, you know, I texted you and you haven't texted me back within 30 seconds. You know, it's that, I mean, that's an extreme, right? But
I mean, yeah, it is, but it's, man, I mean, and it's not just, and actually the experience, so that's what it looks like from the outside. The inside is, I texted him, he's not texting me back. And I'm getting increasingly panicked, and I'm making stories in my head, and he's abandoning me. This is abandonment issues. You know, we call them daddy issues sometimes.
Right.
Right. This is like, and I know this one so well. But it's panic.
Yeah, it is
panic. And it is, oh God, it's debilitating. Anyway.
It is. And it's awful. It's an awful place to be, right?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
So there's insecure anxious. So that's one. And then there's 2 insecure avoidance. And one of them is dismissive and the other is fearful. And dismissive, avoidant, dismissive, avoidant, I don't remember which way it goes. It doesn't matter. Are the people who you start to get into an argument and they're gone.
Yeah.
You check the fuck out. They're out of there. They may physically leave. They may, you know, hang up the phone. They won't talk to you. And what's going on for them is their system is so flooded and overwhelmed with all this sensory input that they have to step away so that they can like get their heads clear. Because literally, you know, in any of these insecure states, our heads are just like all over the fucking place.
Right. And it's also, I mean, is that a fight, flight, or a freeze? Like they're freezing?
It's a flight. That's a flight.
It's a flight. It's a flight. Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
And then, whereas we could see anxious as more of a fight, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because
we're like,
where anxious can show up. Yeah. It's like, I'm grabbing for you. And what that grabbing can look like even is, I'm going to pick a fight with you because I just want you to respond.
Yes.
I just want something.
Yep.
I don't even care if it's you screaming at me that I'm a horrible person. I need a response. And this used to happen all the time with me and my ex. It was so like, we're so fucking textbook. I'm not kidding. Our couples therapists were all like, you guys are like, you're textbook. We're like, yeah, we are. Right?
But we didn't even know, like, I mean, I know that when my ex and I were like this too in the beginning, right? In the first, like, I don't know, few years, and this was 20 years ago for me. But attachment theory is really new. So
it's new in pop culture.
Like nobody used these words. And we saw lots of therapists. Nobody used these words.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, so that there's the avoidant dismissive.
And then there's the avoidant fearful. And avoidant fearful looks like a combination of anxious and dismissive. And what it is it's, okay, I'm feeling abandoned by you for whatever reason. So I'm going to come towards you in whatever ways I come towards you. And then you start coming back towards me in whatever way you do that. And then I'm out of here. So it's this push-pull.
Yes. I had an ex like that. That was my trauma bond. For all of you guys who remember the trauma bond episode, that was my trauma bond relationship.
Yeah. And my ex and I were, I think that really I am more a fearful avoidant attachment style, but it was all anxious with him because we would get into something would happen. I'd poke. He'd finally fucking react.
Right.
And I'm not kidding you. It was like this, like snap of the fingers. My entire system was calm.
Wow.
He would be standing there screaming at the top of his lungs at me, like all of a sudden. And I'd just be like,
oh,
thank God he's here. Right. And that's exactly what it was like, okay, he's fucking finally present.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
And it was, I mean, it's fascinating to me, like how that,
we're geeks, right?
Yeah, total geek, right? How that worked, because it was like, I was so worked up. Like, I thought I was going to fucking die if he didn't like somehow like respond to me.
Sure.
And then he does in a way that, not a nice way, right? Because also, he was getting poked, he was getting needled, he was getting, I was picking the fight here. He responds to it, and I'm like, okay, we're good.
And he's like, we
are not good.
Good.
Yeah, right.
Oh my God.
And so that, that shows up over and over and over. And we, and that's where doing any sort of body-centered mindfulness work is really important. That's where nervous system regulation comes in, like learning how to self-regulate and self-soothe in ways that aren't ultimately harmful, right? Mm-hmm. I think we all pick up many different ways to self-soothe in our lives, some of which are perfectly fine, well, they're all perfectly fine, but some of which are not harmful and some of which are, right? I mean, we look at addiction, and addiction is a coping mechanism. That's what it is.
Yep.
It's a way to self-regulate and self-soothe.
Almost all people with addictions suffered some form of trauma. Like,
yes,
it really is the X factor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that.
No, me neither. And I think we need to recognize that what this looks like is not always alcoholism or drug addiction, right? This is retail therapy when we can't afford it.
Yes.
Right. This is over exercise.
Or when we can, by the way.
Or when we can. Right. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Right.
This is over exercising. This is eating disorders. This is right. Yeah. Right.
With
and
eating
whatever
disorders.
that looks like. And eating disorders, I include that like in dieting, just like diet culture and extreme dieting. Right.
Absolutely.
You don't have to be binging or purging or, anorexic.
It took me so long to identify my eating disorders because I wasn't anorexic in the way that I had heard defined. Like, I didn't look at myself in the mirror and think I was fatter than I was. Right. And I wasn't bulimic. So I was like, well, then I don't have an eating disorder.
Right.
And, it took a long time before I started recognizing or learning about, well, first of all, obsessive diet culture and all of that. And that's a whole other episode.
Yes. Or 5, really.
Or 5. Exactly. The ongoing sagas. But yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I just wanted to pause and sort of state that, because I think we do think, many people think that eating disorders look like basically one of two things.
Right. And they don't.
Yeah. They just don't.
Yeah. Chronic dieting, chronic exercising, like to like extreme.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, sure. We should all go on walks and, and do some cardio and, that can be good for us.
Yeah.
And I want to note actually that exercise can exacerbate our trauma. Because I know, isn't that crazy? So it's one of these things where, we're told, we've been told, I've been told, oh, if you just exercise, it'll help your depression. Well, this is true if you don't have anxiety and a trauma history, because what's happening is if you start training for a marathon, for example, you're telling your body, I'm in flight response. That's what you're doing.
Right.
And so then all the cortisol, all the adrenaline, right? It can bring up panic attacks. It can make the ways are what's called the window of tolerance that much smaller, because we're so activated now. We've activated ourselves so much. And the whole point of doing self-regulation work, doing this body-centered mindfulness work, like my approach is called trauma-informed embodiment, right? Doing any of these approaches is to be able to create this, what's called the window of tolerance of an event happens. I sense that it's bothering me, but I'm not immediately in overwhelm.
Yep.
Right? So there's a window here where I'm sensing, okay, I'm starting to get upset. And we can take that step back and go, what is going on?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, I need to calm myself down.
This is that conversation between the front and the back parts of the brain that we were talking about to begin with, right? We have to have that space in order to allow for that conversation.
Exactly. So the greater the greater your window of tolerance, the more you're able to then soothe and calm yourself and then respond instead of react to a situation, right? Because reaction is automatic, whereas responding is that mindful, intentional, thought out somewhat, I'm not losing my shit all over you. I'm like, I've actually took a moment and had a drink of water and took a couple breaths and
yes. The example I always use about this for people, just so that we can give sort of like a concrete example, right? Is that for me, my dad was always late to pick me up for his weekends because my parents were divorced, and he was always late and sometimes didn't show up because he was busy doing other things. And so I have very, very, very strong abandonment issues from that, right? And so in the beginning of my sort of dating history, right, in my 20s and stuff, or even as a teenager, but more so in my 20s when dating was more sort of dating as opposed to you meet a guy and now he's your boyfriend, right?
Right.
So if a guy was late to come and pick me up or late for a date, I was psycho.
Yeah.
I was reacting from that place of complete and utter abandonment, that little girl waiting for her daddy who never showed up.
Yeah.
And those feelings of he doesn't love me, he wishes I was never born, he all of that stuff, right? And that's the reaction I was having. And so a guy would be late and I'd be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Or I would be hysterically crying or I would be yelling, but it was like a full-blown psychotic episode, right? From the outside, from his perspective, he was like, she's fucking crazy, right? I'm out.
Right.
And then, by the way, I would be abandoned.
Right.
And so it took, over the years, it took years and years for me to go, oh, look, that's my response. I'm having a trauma response. I'm freaking out. I can feel my adrenaline rising. I can feel my heart rate getting, my heart beating faster. I can, whatever the somatic expression of this.
Right.
And then I could take the space to be like, okay, he's just late. I don't have to make it mean anything. It's just that he's late. And then I get the opportunity, and we were talking about, how this affects our relationships, right?
Right.
Then I get the opportunity to say to somebody, hey, guess what? I have this trauma, this thing. And so it's really important to me that if you're going to be late, you give me a call, or let me know, or that, you try not to be late, but if you are, I need, and that actually builds relationship. That's how we build relationship, right? Is that because then, if the guy's like, fuck you, whatever, then you're like, thanks, sayonara, we're not in that. We're not doing this. Right. But give someone an opportunity to go, it builds intimacy. It builds trust.
Yeah. All of that. Right. And it's also true to remember that even when we ask a person, one, they don't have to give us our ask, right? I mean, that's one thing.
Yeah.
And then we get to decide if we're staying or not, right? That's a thing. Yeah. And also we can have an ask, and they can say, yes, I can give you that ask. And there's still going to be times that they're not.
Yep. And they can make a counter request. Right. They can say like, yeah, that's going to be hard for me. So, maybe I could do it this way. Right.
Right.
And that's how because not everyone's going to step up to the plate with all of your requests at all times, right? This is how we do relationships. This is what they mean by compromise, by the way. Right. It's not that you're giving up something. It's that you're finding the place on the playing field where both people are comfortable.
Exactly.
Work together.
Exactly.
Wherever that magical place is.
Yeah, wherever that may be, right? And recognizing, that there's still going to be missteps. And so with each misstep, we get to decide, we get to see if there's a pattern. Is there a pattern here? Is there is this an acceptable pattern for me? Like, is this something that I can learn to work with? Or is this like really an unacceptable pattern for me?
Is this a deal breaker? Like, yeah, absolutely.
And we're never, ever, ever going to be able to get to that place of figuring that stuff out if we aren't first able to take that half step back, go, okay, my shit's kicked up, and it's not this guy's fault, right? It's not this person's fault. This is, this happened long before they came along, right? Mm-hmm. And okay, and now I get to communicate with them, or I have the opportunity to communicate with them. And if we don't communicate, which trauma tells us, right? Typically, our childhood experiences tell us, you don't communicate your wants, your needs.
Your needs are not welcome here.
Yeah, like we're told that. And so it is really challenging and scary to then even say something so simple as, I get really freaked out when you're running late and you haven't texted me and to just let me know. Yeah. Absolutely. And just saying that, it's like, well, that's an easy enough thing to say. Why wouldn't you just be able to say that? And it's like, no, that's like, I am bearing my soul to you now.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And then it takes a few times of people being like, oh, okay, that totally makes sense. I don't want that for you. Let me, and that is so healing.
It is.
And that's that continues the healing, right? Is allowing another person to actually show up for you in a healing way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh God, it just goes miles.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It is.
It is so
and it's like, and it is. It's so funny how and well, funny might not be the right word. Interesting, perhaps. Sad. Yeah. I don't know. For me, in my personal experiences, how little of that it actually takes, how little of that, like being met and being seen and being heard, for me to be like, okay, we're good.
100%. It's crazy.
Right? I'm not asking people to like go to the moon and back here. It's like really simple things. And when they're able to do that, it's like, whole new brain gets to come alive.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
And, and sometimes it is easy for them, right? And sometimes it's hard for them because sometimes your trauma rubs up against someone else's trauma, right? So if the person you're talking to had a really controlling mother and was like, like this triggers the fuck out of them, then like you've got some work to do.
Yeah.
But absolutely. Let's talk about cultural relational trauma is how
I've renamed it actually to collective. This has been a year in the works, but I've actually just started changing all of my stuff. So I call it now collective relational trauma.
Right.
But what that is essentially the way the greater collective, our greater culture, the patriarchy, white supremacy, authoritarianism, ableism, all of those things impact the ways that we relate with other people. Mm-hmm. So, we get messaging that there is a right kind of person to be, right? So male, white, relatively wealthy, able-bodied, thin, right. Mhm.
Hot. Well, yeah.
Yeah, right. Aesthetically pleasing,
Uh-huh.
intelligent. Like da da da. I mean, we can list all the things, right?
Yeah.
So there's this mythical ideal um, that all of us are trained to strive for.
Yes.
You want to be successful, and this is what success looks like, right? Success is defined for us,
Mm-hmm.
and so.
And for women, this is, and for women, right, it may not be male, right? Because that's the white man is the the top of the hierarchy, right? But, for women, this is, skinny, white, yoga
Yeah,
bendy, right? We call her, in our circles, we call her the female, we call her a flab, which is,
right,
the female lifestyle empowerment brand. This is
right.
the thing that you
Yeah,
see on Instagram all over. These are the influencers, right?
right. The lifestyle
The
brand people.
lifestyle brand people.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so we have this ideal of the way we're supposed to be. So, quote, ideal, that we are told that is how we are supposed to want to be.
Right.
Right. And we internalize this message. And then that impacts us in multiple ways. One of the ways it impacts us is the way we relate to ourselves. So I'm not good enough. I'm too much. I take up too much space. I'm too loud. I'm too stupid. I'm not pretty enough. Right. I mean, whatever.
I weigh too much. My legs are too this. My arms aren't this. Yeah.
Yeah. All the ways, right? I don't have the right career. I'm not a good enough mom. I'm a horrible partner. I'm like, all of that shows up, right? So that's how we're relating to ourselves, which then bleeds out in how we relate to others, because we're so fucking judgmental of ourselves that then we start being really judgmental of others. I believe I'm still kind of digging into how this impacts our relationships across race, and how this, impacts our relationships across sexuality, and, all of that. And I believe it does, because
absolutely.
It's all that messaging, right?
Yep.
And because we don't feel like we're worthy or deserving or good enough, or that we are way too much, then we don't ask for our wants. We don't ask for our needs, and we don't know how, because we're never taught how. Right. And so we can't be vulnerable with other people. And the way we get to getting our needs or wants met is by demanding them, and by being, really forceful and aggressive about it, or being completely passive and like stuffing everything down. Right. We kind of go to
right, because so like asking directly would be sort of an assertive nature, right? Like there's no wrong here. You're no better than me. I'm no better than you. This is simply just something that I need. Right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then when we can't be assertive, when there's a power differential, either perceived or actual, right? We or especially internalized, we become aggressive, right? Because we prove that we're actually worthy. So fuck you.
Yeah.
Or we're passive because we feel that we are so unworthy.
Right. Yeah. And I think most of us bounce back and forth between those two.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty typical. In some situations we're passive, in other situations we're aggressive. And that is different from, as you said, being assertive and being vulnerable and being like, I actually need you to pick your socks up off the floor.
Right.
Like, and this is why, like, it makes me feel this way, and, and whatever, all the things, right? Mm-hmm. But we have to, be able to recognize why them leaving their fucking socks on the floor is making us feel the way it feels, right?
Yes. Yeah.
We have to acknowledge that. We have to be able to tune into that. We have to, instead of being able to do that, ask, right? Instead of saying, you're a fucking slob, you never pick up your socks, you're such an asshole, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And I've been there. Like, so,
100%. And this is where knowledge really, it's so important, right? I always tell the story. I don't know if I've told it before on the podcast, but I have friends that we were in group couples therapy with, right? And we did imago therapy, and she came for an imago dialogue talking about changing the toilet paper roll, how he didn't change the toilet paper roll. And I was like, really? We're going to have a fucking dialogue about this? Like, are you fucking kidding me? It's the fucking toilet. Like, really? Well, and then it went on, and it turns out that, you know, her brother was always treated like a prince, never asked, you know, nobody ever asked anyone anything of him. He, you know, her whole life, she felt like she was there to just simply serve the men in her family. And she's in an Indian family. So it was, you know, there was all sorts of stuff there. And by the end of the dialogue, we were all in tears, like, oh my God, like, of course this bothers you.
Right.
It bothers you on such a, like, unbearably deep level.
Yeah.
Higher sort of, you know, and this is her husband that she's asking about. So she doesn't want to feel that way with her husband, right? But the level of self-awareness that would have to come for her to be able to dig into why him, otherwise she's just like, fuck you, change the toilet paper roll, and she's the nag and she's the bitch. Right. And when we get to that level of self-awareness about, like, why is that triggering me? Sure. Is it a pain in the ass? Is it a little, like, entitled that he doesn't change the toilet paper roll? Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. We could make a story that, like, dude, change the fucking toilet paper roll.
Yeah.
But the more important part is the depth of her own self-awareness, which opens up compassion in other people. Right.
Including the people we're intimate, you know, our partners.
Right. Her husband has never not changed a toilet paper roll since.
Right.
They're still married. They're happily married. And I checked in with them last time I saw them, like a month ago. And I was like, and this is 10 years later, by the way, to 12 years later. And they're like, oh yeah, no, I have never not changed the toilet paper roll.
Yeah.
Right. Like, that's it. Problem solved.
Right. And it required the self-awareness. It required being able to do the ask. It required that vulnerability. All of that.
Yeah. And that's what I was bringing it up, was the self-awareness, because we can't make the ask if we don't know why we're asking.
Right.
Otherwise, we're just in our reptilian brain reacting.
Yeah.
And it just
I'm going to die because you didn't change the fucking toilet paper roll.
Right.
I mean, that's literally what our system is saying. Like,
100%.
You're going to die because this isn't happening. Even though our front brain's going, you're a fucking idiot. What do you mean? You're not going to die from him not changing the goddamn toilet paper roll, right? But our entire system is like, nope, this is life or death.
Yep, exactly. And when you come at toilet paper rolls like it's life or death, you look fucking crazy.
Yes.
The other person is just, their only response is, you're fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Right? But when you come at toilet paper rolls of, like, my childhood wounding and my trauma,
right,
you know, it's not so crazy anymore.
Right. It makes sense then.
It makes perfect sense.
Right.
So let's go back to this collective piece, right? Because we sort of, sorry, I derailed us.
No.
Let's go back to the collective piece about how it impacts our relationships cross-culturally.
Right. So when we're oppressed, in whatever ways we're oppressed, and we're all oppressed, and one, you know, some to more degrees than others, right? Then we are in survival mode then, because we are competing for resources. We are competing, we're competing for resources, all resources, be that food, jobs, housing, love, attention, right? All of that. We're in competition.
Yeah.
Because there is, with oppression comes that scarce mentality idea that there's only so much pie, and it can only be cut into so many pieces. And, you know, if Sue comes in and tries to take a piece, well, that's one less piece for you. And it's like, the reality is, well, sure, there are some resources that are finite. That is a true statement, right? Hello, climate change, right? And also, it's also kind of bullshit.
Right.
And
love is not a finite resource.
Right. It's not. Acceptance, compassion, you know, caring. None of those are finite resources.
Right.
And so where so we're in a collective right now where the status quo is individualism and everybody's out for themselves. You know, you got to take care of yourself. You can't rely on anyone else and blah, 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 all the bullshit, right? Yeah. And where we want to shift to or get back to is the idea of, no, we're all in this together, actually.
Can I just point out that we're literally living this right now?
Yes.
Where with the coronavirus and everyone's stockpiling toilet paper, like why? But all of the
thank you.
all of the, the hand sanitizer, which means that so you have 70 bottles of hand sanitizer in your house, but the people that you're going to come in contact with, PS, don't have any hand sanitizer, so you're not actually protecting yourself. But this is not about the greater good. This isn't about the collective. This is about the individual. Now, if you've got 70 bottles of hand sanitizer and other people who may be less fortunate than you don't have any.
Right. I mean, hospitals are
don't have them.
Here. I don't know what they're doing anywhere else, but I know here, I'm in Seattle, for those who don't know, have had to post, we don't have any masks.
Right.
You don't get any face masks. We are not giving those to anyone ever. Yeah.
And they don't have them. And that's because
they don't have them.
Because Joe Bob in wherever has a stockpile of them in his garage for what? And now doctors and nurses don't have them.
Right.
We could go on about that for another hour.
We could, for sure.
But I want to touch briefly, we're coming up on, we're going long, but I want to touch briefly on how our trauma manifests, how it actually impacts our physical bodies. Mm-hmm. We've had a lot of talk in our Facebook group, which for those of you guys who don't know, Gwen is in. Thank God. You should also join hers, which we will link in the show notes, and also follow her on Instagram because she got some smart ass shit that she posts. Seriously. For me, I had chronic back pain for 3.5 years. And when I ended my marriage, it stopped.
Shock. Right?
Right. And there are women in there. There was a great thread. I don't know if you saw it, of women just like listing all of their ailments, and they're like autoimmune things that just vanished when they got divorced, or like serious shit.
Yeah. So when we're in that survival mode, our cortisol levels are through the roof. Our adrenaline is hot, is constantly being pumped. Eventually, how that then works is that we stop producing cortisol because we've overproduced it. So then we underproduce it, right? The same is true with adrenaline. So
for those who don't know, these are stress hormones.
Yeah, these are the stress hormones, right? And so and the production of our stress hormones is also, they're necessary actually for our day-to-day living. It's not just like, I'm freaking out. That's when we get a burst of them, but we actually need cortisol to keep going, right? And when we're flooded with these hormones constantly, then that shows up as muscle pain, as joint pain. It shows up as inflammation, shows up as migraines. It shows up as chronic fatigue. It shows up as what are some of the other things? Like being like autoimmune issues, in that being really susceptible to colds, to flus, to the everyday ailments that we have. People develop allergies. People can develop asthma. There have been a couple of studies that have linked specific types of trauma to specific types of cancers. Specifically sexual trauma and reproductive cancers. Right. And so this is all like, so it all impacts the body, like long-term, and can be, some of these things are like not reversible. Some of these things we can't just, we leave the marriage and then, we're all better. It can get better. Right. But like things like, one of the first things I have my individual clients get checked or tell me about is their thyroid. What's going on with your thyroid?
Interesting.
Like, I need to know what your thyroid levels are here, because if they're not at a good level, we can do all the damn nervous system work you want, and it's not going to touch you. Like, because you need medication. Like, you need to be able to have your thyroid functioning appropriately, right?
Right.
And for those who don't know, hyper and hypothyroidism both cause anxiety. One of the symptoms of them is extreme anxiety, along with, a myriad of other things, right? But like, I can't help you with your anxiety if your thyroid's not working. Right.
It's like if you're having a chemical imbalance that is generating anxiety, you can't fix it with trauma work.
Yeah, I can't fix it with, doing some, simple lip tap things, or, whatever exercises we work with. But so I think it's really important to remember that we need to be taking care of our bodies medically, as well as mentally, emotionally, psychologically, right? They go together, and one isn't going to cure the other, but together we need that holistic approach.
Yes.
And it's like, really, like, that's a really vital thing for me with my clients, is like, you got to be taking your thyroid meds, or you got to be taking, or whatever, medications they need to take. Right.
Yeah.
I just think that's really important.
I mean, I wholeheartedly agree.
Right.
Absolutely, right. Because you can't be putting on a Band-Aid on something, and then it's like you're putting a Band-Aid on, and then like lifting it up and cutting, and then putting the Band-Aid back over, and then lifting it up and cutting it. Like it doesn't, it's not working.
Well, and in the immortal words of Taylor Swift, Band-Aids don't fix bullet holes. Right. But they don't. I mean, like, that's simply true. Like, and for most of us, our trauma is a bunch of bullet holes.
Lots of bullet holes.
And so, right. So we need the both. We need the both and.
Yep. Oh my gosh. Okay. Gwen, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about all of these things. And so where can people find you?
You can find, I'm most active on Instagram. That is where I'm most active. And I'm Gwynn Raimondi. Do you want me to spell it out?
It'll be linked in the show notes.
Okay, it's linked.
Find it.
So that's where I'm most active. I'm also on Facebook. My quote, personal page is basically all public. I also have a business page, and then I have a group, all on Facebook. And the group is called Trauma Informed Embodiment. And you can request to join, and I will likely let you in, unless you just joined Facebook 2 days ago, and then I won't let you in. But so those are the big places. I write a newsletter every week-ish. Ish. Yeah, ish.
I know, me too. Ish.
Something's really good, and it comes out every week for a good stretch of time, and then I'm like, I'm not getting to it this week. But anyways, so there's that. I work with folks individually. I work virtually. So
you work remotely. This is the important thing. You work remotely.
I work remotely. Yeah. So all my individual clients I see via Zoom. I offer groups throughout the year. Sometimes we meet via Zoom, depending on the group. Like, I have a sexual trauma survivors group.
When is that one starting?
That starts on March 16th.
We're going live on March 31st. So.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all right. But I offer that every year. So that's an annual offering. And then I offer what I call they're called embodied writing groups 4 times a year. And I have the next one is actually going to be on relationships and relating with other people. And that starts either end of April or end of May.
Great. Okay,
One of those two.
One of those two.
And that's a 7-week thing.
And if you follow Gwynn anywhere and you join a group, whatever, you'll hear about it. You'll know about it.
And I have a website, of course, like everyone does, and that's just myname.com. So gwynraimondi.com, not literally my name.com.
Hilarious. right. I adore you. I'm so happy that we got to talk about this stuff. I'm sure there's so much more we could talk about, but we are definitely out of time. And, but you know, for those of you who are in the Facebook group, Gwynn is in there too. So,
yeah.
You know, as all my favorite people tend to be.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, my love. Mwah.
Okay. Mwah. Talk to you later.
Okay. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. If you like what you hear, head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen in and leave me a review. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at the Divorce Survival Guide. I'll see you next time, and until then, remember, you, my love, deserve to be happy.